Welcome to the show with me, Dan, and my guest, Hannah Channing. How you doing, Hannah?
I'm well, thank you, Dan. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. So this is Hannah's second time on the show.
Season pro.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I actually got quite a lot of good feedback after the last episode. I know you don't believe it, but I got a lot of really, really good feedback.
I was really nervous you were going to bring that up in the intro. The pressure now. Too much.
Well, the pressure.
Most of that feedback was from my aunts and uncles.
That's not entirely true, but somewhat true. But no, there was just a lot of good feedback. But don't feel the pressure too much. I feel the pressure is more on me today because last time you came up with the topic, and it was very much sort of fueled by you wanting to talk about it. I think even you brought it up first of all, and I didn't even think about that at all. It was fear of failure, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas this one, I had an idea. So I'll just, I guess it's a good way to start. Is I make a lot of notes in my phone, and there's in some of my notes, it's sort of like stuff to think about when I've got time. So I do a lot of writing, and one of the things I've sort of wrestled with at the back of my mind for probably quite a long time is just the idea of loneliness and relationships and whether people can be happy being alone and those sort of things. And I'd written it in my notes to think about and to sit down and write it through. But after our chat last time, and sort of how you went into something that's quite a personal psychological thing, I thought you'd be a good person just to sort of bounce some ideas off and ask you your thoughts on it, really. So that's sort of where the idea came from. Be happy to jump in if you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very interesting topic, so I'll be very happy to explore it with you.
Cool. I guess I'd start sort of by I don't want to introduce you too bluntly, but I see that you are. I've always seen you, and correct me if I'm wrong, as sort of quite an independent person, a strong, independent woman. And, and we sort of have similar. We touched on it in the last podcast, but similar views on sort of marriage. We're both not interested in getting married anytime, and we're both not interested in having kids of our own. And so, what's your sort of view on sort of going into a relationship, and when you're single, do you feel that you as a person have needed to be in a relationship, or do you feel like you've been, without downplaying, how amazing your relationship with your partner is now, but just as a general thing of like, how have you find sort of being single or going into a relationship, if that's not too much of a general question?
No. I think it's a really interesting one, and it is something that I've reflected on a lot, actually, because I was in a relationship quite young that was a long-term relationship, so sort of a 10-year relationship from the age of 16. And like you say, I'm quite an independent person, and that was a very independent relationship, which was for me a positive thing. But I think as you grow up, the sort of differences when you have a very independent relationship, you can sort of start growing up separately rather than together, which is a reductionist view of kind of what happened. And then when I became single after that relationship ended, so I was sort of mid-20s, I hadn't realized how much of my, because it was such an independent relationship, how much of my self-worth was tied up in that. I thought, because we had very independent lives, I didn't think that emotionally I was as dependent on that relationship as it turned out that I was when I became single. And I realized actually how damaging some aspects of that relationship, and certainly some of the more extreme independent parts of that relationship, have been on my self-esteem. And so when I was single and I sort of could take a lot more control over how I felt about myself, and it was like another level of independence that I hadn't experienced in adulthood because I'd been in that relationship from such a young age. Being single was the most incredible thing in the world. And so then when I'm in a relationship now, whatever I went into relationship wise had to be far superior to how it felt being single, because I really enjoyed being on my own and being in control of my own sort of self-esteem, self-worth, my own time. And yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. So what did you so when you said the first relationship you had, the 10-year relationship,
Mm,
that was very independent. Um
yeah.
so did you did you what changed then? What did you miss anything about it when you went single, or you sort of said sort of like self-esteem and stuff, but if you were very independent in that relationship anyway, can
Mm.
you be, I guess, more specific in how what what was it that was unhealthy, or because I guess from my point of view, like having independence in a relationship is a good thing.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
so why did you struggle to then go single, or
No, I grieved the relationship and all the stuff that comes with being in a long-term relationship in terms of, the mutual friends that you make and then lose, and the sort of
mm,
second family you have and then lose. So I grieved all that, but the actual relationship side of it, I didn't miss at all. And I think I completely agree, independence in relationship, and even, in this relationship, it's still a very independent relationship in all the ways that I think it's healthy for it to
mm,
be an independent relationship. What was unhealthy is because we were so independent, we didn't really share in some of the kind of more the deeper aspects of what we were going through. There would be long periods where we wouldn't see each other, and I think it got so extreme that you end up not actually feeling that loved by that person.
mm,
And and that's then the conflict that it has on your self-esteem, because when you're in a relationship, you are one of the positive things I think from being in a relationship is an affection and sort of support, but a love that is it's it's sort of desire led. And I think that your self esteem is quite heavily tied into that, so there's this vulnerability that comes from being in a relationship as well, which is the sort of scary part. And I think where we have become so independent in that particular relationship is we weren't vulnerable with one another. And that I think that sort of affects then how close you can become with someone, and then in turn how loved you feel by that person, and then in turn how much you value yourself.
mm.
That's sort of the emotional journey as I saw it. So then when I became single, that vulnerability was completely eliminated from the equation, because I didn't have that sort of risk factor of being hurt, or of someone seeing me at my rawest, or whatever
Right.
that sort of means. And I think I was almost too young to be able to be open enough in that relationship to be vulnerable enough. Does that make sense? I feel like I've
Yeah.
just
No, it does. What I'm intrigued about is you sort of this feeling of being unloved in a relationship for whatever reason. I guess other people have their own reasons. Um, do you not then feel that as a single person, like you feel unloved, or because then you don't have a that romantic relationship? You know, if you've got the same friends and the family you did while you're in the relationship, did you still
mm,
feel that not being loved when you were single, or do you think actually having a partner who's just not uh What do you think that is? Like, if you then don't have a partner at all that's not loving you, then doesn't that lack of love still stay? Or
No, I think they're conflicting, they're conflicting thoughts, in that you get, yes, you get a different sort of love and affection from being in a relationship, but that doesn't mean that you need to have that kind of relationship in your life to feel loved. And actually, I think a lot of times um people put too much emphasis on that kind of love to feel any kind of self-worth. That's, I think, where the the issue comes in. And I have a lot of very conflicting views about relationships, a sort of head over heart, because to me, uh, those sort of romantic relationships almost feel a little bit illogical, um yet I'm still driven towards, I'm in one and I'm very happy in one. So
mm,
it's kind of, I've not really come to any conclusion about what it is that drives us to want, other than certain social constructs. I think that it's more than that, because um a lot of people can see through those social constructs and are still driven towards having a sort of monogamous relationship where they, so we must get something from them. Do
so,
you,
so what's illogical for you about having a partner? Is it a partner in general or particular partner? What do you find that you're sort of resting with on the sort of side of it being illogical?
I think what I am wrestling with biological, I mean, there's different strands. There's the side that, if you're going back to, nature and evolution, then as a species, we're not wired to, mate for life. And I don't personally, and this is, I guess, where I don't know whether it's your same motivation in terms of not wanting to get married, but I don't. That's one of the reasons that I don't believe in marriage for myself, because I don't think that it's a fair expectation to put onto a relationship that you're going to be together for the rest of your life. I think relationships you should enjoy for the moment that you're enjoying them, and for what you're getting out of them in the present, rather than putting too much expectation on where it's going, and that you're going to have that same, um not necessarily dynamics. I think dynamics change whether or not, you still get the same thing from them, but that same kind of level of wanting to to be together. So for me, what I see from relationships is a lot of time that there is this projection of the future on them, and that's what I find illogical. The yeah, and the other aspect of illogical being that actually, um that vulnerability that you don't necessarily get from other relationships in the same way. It's very much a conditional love, whereas, friendships, that's slightly conditional, but less so, I think, than relationships. Family is
Mm,
pretty unconditional, to your kids, to your parents, etc. Whereas with romantic relationships, they are very conditional.
mm,
And what I find interesting is that we invest, that they can, they're the people that at one point in your life, they are the closest person to you out of anyone. They can know you the best. They can have seen you at your worst in a way that maybe your parents haven't in your more grown up life,
yeah.
and they see you at your best. And yet, when the relationship breaks down, you can also never see that person ever again. And
It's really weird that, isn't it? I remember thinking about that and sort of, yeah, like the person you're closest with in your life generally, if you've got a partner, will be that partner. Like you say, you open up to them generally in a way that you would never anyone else, and you love them so much. But it's strange, like you say, that that's the only relationship in your life that it can just it can just be over. It can just,
yeah,
you can't really be over with any other relationship in your life in the same way, unless it's like a boss. But
Yeah.
it's really strange that these, it's almost like two extremes, isn't it? There's got the person you feel the most love for can also be the one that you lose so quickly and so
Yeah.
easily.
And it's that bit, it's like you can understand the bit where you are still emotionally connected to them in a negative way if a relationship breaks down, but it's the bit how you can get to a place where you don't care about them anymore. That's what I find the interesting kind of dynamic, how you can go from being, yeah, that close and that open to genuinely not having any feelings either way for that person, however long it kind of takes to to grieve the relationship. And there is no, I've had friendships that have broken down and I still feel like I'm grieving those friendships. I never feel like I will be over that in the way that you get over romantic relationships, yet that friend I probably wasn't as close to it in a kind of open, vulnerable way that you've been with partners.
Mm,
So
yeah.
why do you think that then we are sort of, do you think we are driven to having partners? And if so, why? And what's your experience with it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the two reasons you gave, I would definitely agree with. This sort of this whole idea of romanticism, and I guess part of romanticism is that future projection you're talking about of like, we're going to be together forever, and you're the one, you're the only one for me. These sort of things, I guess, sort of like, yeah, this romanticism that you get from amazing novels and crappy crappy American chick flicks. I think that sort of stuff, it doesn't feel as deep to me. It actually feels that sort of part of romanticism actually feels quite superficial.
Yeah.
I've said for a while, I think it's more amazing if two people have been together for a long time and they've never got married. They've been together for like 50, 60 years. It's like clearly
Mm,
they want to be together, um,
mm,
and there's no sort of like legal thing stopping them. So I agree with the future projection thing, and I also agree with the conditional thing. It is a strange thing, but I think get forget forget messing up my words. If I'm yeah, I'm still messing them up.
do you need a couple of minutes? You good?
Yep. What is it? Correct me if I'm wrong. That was it. I was gonna say project me if I'm wrong. Forgive me if I'm wrong. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel from our point of view, or I'll say from mine, is you can have a good, healthy relationship without these things. Um,
Yes.
if this future projection thing and the sort of conditional thing, I think there are ways to do it, and I think we're finding a lot with our generation. Well, to be fair, the generation before, maybe in the '60s type thing, but this sort of thinking, making a relationship your own. And there's people on the extreme who, people who have like 10 husbands or 10 wives or whatever. And then there's people on the other extreme who absolutely will go by exactly what everyone else does. And maybe it's more religious, you get married before you have kids and all that sort of stuff. But I think people are finding more that they can just make it their own. Um, and I think you and me are in that category of sort of going, well, we know what we don't like about relationships, and maybe we're sort of making it our own. Do you think? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and been very fortunate with the relationships that I've had that have been able to do that for sure. But I think part of the reason maybe why we've been able to achieve that is because um I think the alternative can't be too terrifying for you. So I think if you're afraid of being on your own and losing the support that you get from having a partner, that's I think where um sometimes uh, the relationship becomes dependent in a negative way, because I think you have to be comfortable, you have to be happy to be able to be on your own, to be able to have a relationship where you can have that approach to it, because you have to be comfortable with the idea that if it ends, you're going to be okay. Do you, do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. I mean, that was going to bring on to basically that's already starting to answer my next question, which was around sort of how much sort of happiness do you put on your partner bringing to you? Like, where do you think that line is? Like, because
Mm,
I mean, you could always say you're never going to be if you ever do accept or want to be in a relationship, or you meet someone you want to be in a relationship with, then you can never say that you were truly 100% happy alone. Otherwise, you would feel that no need. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's difficult. How do you sort of differentiate what your partner brings and what you're supposed to sort of bring in terms of your own happiness?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think a lot of my happiness is understandably wrapped up in my relationship and the sort of joy, without sounding cheesy, that that brings. I think what I was, m- I think what I was more thinking with that is that if we broke up, I
Mm,
would be grieving the loss of that person in my life. What I wouldn't be grieving is a future I thought I was going to have with that person.
right.
So, and that the grief of the person, going back to what we were saying before in terms of it being a very different type of conditional relationship, where it seems the only one where you can come out and actually get through that grief and be over it, and be that person be a stranger to you, and you eventually kind of move on. So that grief for me would be pretty short term. If we broke up, it would be a case of being devastated that the happiness that person brought to my life wasn't there anymore. But what I wouldn't be grieving is a future that I thought we were going to have together, because I have no um expectation of it, you
Is there
know,
not? There
it
must be.
having a future.
Is there not some? There must be some sort of idea of a future. Even in terms of like booking a holiday or like I mean, if things were to break down extremely quickly and within a week
Mm,
you're single, surely
yeah.
there'd be some sort of future or things that you
But
know.
that's still relatively short. Booking a holiday is still relatively short term. If we broke up before we were going on a holiday, the thing I would be grieving is still that relationship breaking down, not that the holiday we were going to go on. Whereas, so that's still relatively short term. I'm talking about a longer term future, where you may see yourself getting old together and that sort of thing.
Hmm. Well,
I'm not afraid of being old and being on my own.
what about like a house, like getting a house together or making a house
Mm.
together? And would that sort of play into it, or are you still quite sort of contracty in your head in terms of like if it were to break down, then we would get this, and this, or
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's the exact approach we took. It was terrifying for me to buy the place I have with my partner. It was a lot of mental turmoil to come to the decision, but I took quite a practical approach to it in the end and tried to set my emotions aside. We have a pretty robust contract in place. I didn't go into it emotionally thinking that this is our forever home.
mm,
This is a nice place that we can live in together. But we very much have a contract where what we put into it, we get out, if we ever break up. And obviously, because I'm so happy in my relationship, I'm hoping that we don't break up. This isn't me saying we're gonna,
no,
break up
no.
in 5, 6, 7 years. I'm just prepared for the possibility of that happening.
And I think, well, for me personally, I think it helps the relationship. It's really cold sounding. It's really because I feel the same, and I think I come across as cold when I say it. But I think once you get past that sort of contract phase in quotation marks, you both don't have to think about it. You don't. It
Yeah,
doesn't add
definitely.
another element of like, oh, this and this, and like, if even if
Yeah.
you're just going through a rocky patch, it might come into your mind if you haven't had an agreement beforehand of sort of certain things, especially when it comes to money. Then that can be
Yeah.
another thing that can bring anxiety. Oh, what would happen if we broke up? What would happen with the house?
Yeah.
I personally think, even though the start of actually having those sort of conversations can be arduous, sometimes really tumultuous, other words that end in us. Um, but I think once you have that discussion and you both iron it out and you both, like a business agreement, you both have just come to an agreement on it, you just don't have to think about it anymore.
Well, that's it. And I think going back to what you were saying earlier about independence, I think it's also an element of that in there, because if you are, complete, not completely, but if you are independent financially and all those elements that are very practical in a relationship, but you have, um, you're not dependent on each other in those other ways, then you know that the only reason that you're with that person is because you want to be with that person,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
because you don't have those other ties, and
and you can
you know
focus
how
a
to
lot
bring each
more
person in.
on the problems at the time. If there's emotional problem between you, if there's a relationship issue that's got nothing to do with, well, just the money thing, for example, let's say it's just, maybe one of you don't open up enough, or one of them's got a problem with the mother-in-law, or then you can focus on that without having to worry about these other things. You can just be like, well, this is this issue. We don't have to bring in all these other problems into it, I guess.
Factors, yeah, exactly.
Um, so, how do you, because you've been in a relationship where you were super independent, and it seems like you were too independent, unhealthily independent in your 10-year relationship.
Hmm.
What do you find works for you? And this could serve as for people listening as maybe tips in their own life, or just you just speaking personally from your own experiences. Where do you practically find you you can get your independence? And you feel that's a healthy amount of independence in a relationship.
That's that's a very good question. Definitely not a relationship guru in any way, shape, or form. Um,
Had a
so
chatting relationship guru. That would be the title.
I would say not expecting the other person to share your attitudes, to share in your hobbies. I think you have to have a life that you can, you can discuss and laugh with and whatever with your partner, but they don't have to be a part of it. I think the what I sometimes see from relationships, and this is coming from someone who tends to be over logical. So again, apologies if I seem kind of cold, but sometimes with relationships, I don't understand why they become one person, because you're still two very individual people. I mean, I'm take it to the extreme. I don't even send like joint birthday cards from me and my partner. But that's also, I think, completely fair, because if I was writing a birthday card to my sister, for example, I think that's a nice opportunity to put down permanently in ink, what that person means to you. Otherwise, you're just wasting paper. So
Yeah.
then those sort of feelings and that relationship you have with the person you're sending a card to, it's not going to be the same as what your partner has with that person, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So
Well, by the way,
I think
we will do wasting paper on another podcast episode. That could just be a whole subject. I'm sure we've
I
got.
have a lot to say on that.
But yeah, so I know what you say. It's
um,
sort of like you don't your partner's not going to have the same thoughts and feelings about for your sister that you do.
Totally. And your partner's opinions and attitudes, although they're likely to be relatively, on the big things, relatively similar in some regards for it to work. I think if you fundamentally have completely opposing attitudes, I don't, I think that's rarer.
Yeah.
But to expect them to be the same and share the same. I think it's just completely unrealistic, and um
And even though it sounds cold, and believe me, I'm aware of that sort of feeling so much of just always sounding cold, but I genuinely, in my view, think it helps the relationship. Like these
mm,
things sound like they're just for yourself, and they're not going to help the relationship at all. It's actually making it worse, or it's making the other person feel worse. But I think genuinely having independence in a relationship and the other person not being everything helps the relationship. It helps
yeah,
both people.
I
Um,
completely
I
agree.
remember, and I can relate to this in terms of a feeling, but I do remember a particular friend of mine. It was in his late teens, and he'd just broken up with his girlfriend, and it's a typical thing to think, it's a typical thing to feel. Like I say, we've all, I guess, felt it in some way. But he was saying again and again, I've got nothing left, I've got nothing, my whole world is gone, my whole world is gone. And I feel like people, I'm not judging. I Like I say, I've felt this. Everyone, it's very easy to feel like this. But once you look at it logically, or time has passed and you really think about it clearly, I think that is part of the problem, is someone being your whole world. Um,
Hmm.
and I guess it's like anything, I think maybe you and me are a bit of workaholics. If we have that relationship with work where our work is our whole world, that leaves us just probably just as vulnerable.
And so, do you think that that's the reason that it's unhealthy singularly, because it's putting too much emphasis on one thing in your life? You think that's why it's unhealthy?
I think
To
that's definitely a huge part of it. I think my understanding of well-being and happiness is completely multifaceted. It's very easy to go to a silver bullet, and like I say, we all do it, and we all have our like mini addictions, whether it's YouTube or it's having too many drinks or it's whatever. And I think that part of it is just placing too much of our well-being and happiness in one area, and then we become very, I think our subconscious then knows we're in a pretty weak position.
mm,
If you're like I say with the work thing, if I put so much of myself on my work, and I let my relationship wither away, and I don't spend any time with my family, and I let my physical health go, and I don't keep an eye on my mental health, and it's just all work, work, work. If something like what's just happened, where I had, I guess four solid months of no work, I really struggled. I got very low at the latter half of those months, but I realized that because I was maybe focusing too much of my identity and stuff on work. But if I'd done that even more, if I didn't put enough space in my mind for other things outside of work, I could have gone into a really deep. I feel like I could have easily sunk into a very deep depression, because once the thing you've placed everything on is taken away,
you
like I say,
feel like your purpose is gone.
yeah, yeah. So I guess that brings me back to my friend, and I guess maybe he might have placed so much on this relationship and everything was around that when it's gone, it's so much more devastating than it needs to be, I guess.
Do you think you also slightly lose the things that you also loved about the person in the first place? And like, when you're at the start of a relationship, there is more independence, for a lot of relationships. And then as the relationship goes on, people start losing that independence. In this, in this situation where we were talking about people sort of slightly merging into one. Um,
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, because it is obviously, with all these sort of discussions psychologically, every line is hazy, isn't it?
yeah,
And I've found actually through this relationship, I think you and me are in relationships that we feel are very healthy and are really good for us, and we feel very happy in them. Not just a surface happiness, but just like, this is really good. Um, and I think what I've learned actually is it's good to have a bit of merging.
mm,
I've found a lot of benefit from it. There's so many things that I've just naturally got from Emma. I mean, at the time, I'll take the piss and I'll say, "Oh God, I'm turning into you," and she'll say the same. But I found that my idea of it is just becoming a stronger team. Um,
Yeah.
and I guess part of it is trying to balance that with this whole, independence idea. Um, but you're part of a team, and I guess maybe a good analogy that I've just come up with, so it could be awful, but is like, being part of a football team or something like that. You want to be a good member of the team. You want to get on with the other team members. But if it comes to a time when you move to another place, you need to join another team. It doesn't destroy your whole world. You'll be sad. You'll say your goodbyes and all that. But this is probably an awful analogy. But you are still able to move on, or even just not be part of a football team anymore. But I guess
That
it's
is a
sort of
brilliant analogy. If I was going to expect a sporting analogy from anyone, it wouldn't be you.
just trying to be more like my brother. Um, but yeah, so I guess it's that sort of, and it's very difficult to explain in word, but that maybe that sort of balance is being a good team member and being like feeling like you're really strong together. But
Yeah, and cheering the other person on and being their sort of their support, but
yeah,
not, but yeah, okay, I see. It's a good analogy, yeah.
yeah. I mean, in terms of the loneliness thing, do you fit do you feel that you were, I mean, I guess it's been a little while since you were single, but do you feel like you were more lonely single, um, or um, or do you think the loneliness part of it is something that wasn't changed that much by being in a relationship?
I think I definitely personally wasn't lonely when I was single at all. I think loneliness is such a complicated one because you can be, obviously it's not an external thing. You can be surrounded by people and still feel very, very lonely. Um, and you can be on your own and not feel lonely at all. Um, but I think where loneliness comes in terms of like other your relationship with other people is not feeling like there's anyone that can relate to you or that can support you um in the way that maybe you need to be supported. I don't know. I think yeah, I think loneliness is so complicated.
When do you personally feel lonely? Can you recall times when you felt lonely? Again, this could be when you were alone, or it could be around people.
I think for me personally, it's when I feel like um I'm going through something, and like for example, and we touched on this in the last podcast, having a bit of a kind of crises about what I'm doing with my life. Am I wasting my life? Should I be in the job that I'm in? How do I start over? All that sort of stuff. And when you're surrounded by people that seem to have their poop together, that can feel, for me, that's when I probably felt loneliest. But I'm just having a think back. No, yeah, no, I mean, I'm really fortunate in that sense because it must be such a horrendous feeling. But I think it's, I've been with people who have had quite serious depression, and loneliness is a sort of branch of that, and that comes back to that point we were just talking about in terms of being surrounded by people. But if sometimes that's not the cure, it's yeah, does that make
Yeah,
sense?
no, it is. No, it is a difficult one, and I guess the image that comes into my mind. Have you seen Taxi Driver?
No, I haven't. Is that the Robert De Niro one?
Yeah, it's basically about a really lonely man, but there's that just classic image of him walking down the street and there's just other people, and it's been copied millions of times, and it's just a pretty casual image of a person who's in focus and everyone else is blurry. But um, yeah, like you say, that sort of thing, you can be surrounded by people. It could even be people you know, and still feel very lonely. Um,
Mm.
do you do you think it's possible to be alone for a while and not feel lonely? I guess this is a big part of my curiosity, and if you don't have an answer, that's fine. Neither do I. But um, I got really into sort of some Buddhist ideas a few years ago, and there's a lot of benefit I got from it, and still do. Um, but this whole idea of sort of like going off and meditating for a long time, or spending years like in solitary, and do you, I mean, obviously in most people's lives that is completely unimaginable. But do you actually think it's possible to be a long time alone? I guess a better example would be someone who um, lives in a city and they don't have any friends or any family, and they do you think it's possible to try and be happy alone, like not even just a partner, but just not really connecting with anyone, just I
Yeah.
guess going back, doing all the stuff that typical gurus say of like, eat well, and maybe they run every day, and they do
Mm.
all these other things. They get really good night's sleep, and their job is really fulfilling. Maybe they work in computer tech and they've wanted to do that all their life. And so
Mm.
someone who doesn't have to, they go out and they, get food and stuff, and they interact with people on that sort of level, but they don't. Do you think it's possible through like meditation and just training to feel truly content, or do you think that we need those sort of deeper connections with people?
Personally, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Personally, I don't think so, because I think we underestimate how much of our own happiness comes from making other people happy. And I think if you're on your own and not doing that, then I think, and this isn't for everyone, but I'd like to think a large majority of people, a huge amount of our happiness comes from not necessarily helping people, but bringing joy or support or happiness to other people. And if you're alone for a long period of time, I think that's what you're sometimes missing.
Mm,
It can be quite a self-involved lifestyle. Um, and I say that from experience with my ex-partner, and I'm not saying that he's self-involved in any way, shape, or form. And he's a really lovely guy, but he was a sort of practicing Buddhist and would spend really long periods of time on meditation and self-reflection and in isolation. And I don't know if I would necessarily have described him as a very happy person.
mm,
And that's when I've thought about it, and I thought about it at the time when we were together and he was, going through this. That's sort of the conclusion that I came to, is that, well, actually, you know, making other people happy is is quite fulfilling.
mm. I guess one thing I find difficult is if I know people and there's a few people I know who I feel could be lonely, and they don't say it like that, but they're struggling, maybe with their mental health and depression and stuff like that. And I think I agree with you. I'm still unsure because there's all these Buddhists who seem really, Dalai Lama is always, but I guess he's not lonely. He's always out and about. But um,
He looks like a happy chap.
yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, I think I pretty much do agree with you. That there's just so much. I think the way I sort of put it is if if you do like 10 hours of meditation, you'll get as far as like 5 minutes with someone you really get along with. In some ways, not always. Obviously, there's meditation that is beneficial where just hanging out with good people isn't. But I feel
What do you
that
mean in terms of the energy you get from it? How do you
well-being,
mean,
just
sorry?
general well-being, just sort of feeling good, feeling happy, coming
Mm.
out of yourself, even voicing your thoughts. I do lots of writing, so I find that really beneficial. And I wouldn't want to cut that out. I would feel really, really vulnerable to mental health problems if I could never write again. Um,
Mm.
but I'm aware that that only goes so far, and I'm aware that I could be writing for like I say, an hour. But if I just called someone up and had a bit of chat without some of the thoughts, I can feel so much better and a lot clearer in a few minutes. Um, and I
So can
guess,
I ask you a personal
yeah, of
question?
course.
Because I know you mentioned before, and part of your reflection on this has been how you'd sort of felt during lockdown.
Mm,
So what do you think? Because you obviously had writing, but you obviously also you were living with family, and you had a partner over sort of, phone and message, although I appreciate that physically distant.
yeah.
So where do you think that feeling of loneliness was coming from in that period?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I guess that's something to figure out. So at the start, I guess I'll take myself through my journey with my feelings, and then maybe I might be able to find out. But at the start, I felt really great. Actually, it was I like so Emma went. My partner went down to Cornwall, and it worked out best for that for various reasons. And it's for very practical reasons. It's worked out that it'd be better that she stays down there all this time, and that's for both of us. We both made that decision. But so she's been in Cornwall at the start. I was very happy, not that she left, but I I like having that independence, and if I've been with someone for a while, just very intimately, sort of living out of each other's pockets type thing, then it's nice for me to just have that breathing space. Go, oh, what do I want to do today? That sort of thing. So I felt that sort of nice freedom, and I was calling people all the time. I felt so good. I was chatting just loads and loads of people on the phone, and just like, how you doing? How you doing? And yeah, and I was good for a couple of months, and I started the podcast, and obviously that was a good way to connect with people, and still is. I think the loneliness started. I think it was interesting. Me and Emma talked about this the other day. I hope she's all right with me saying this, but we sort of had the opposite feelings. Bear in mind, this isn't extreme, so. But at the start, she was very low, and it was really difficult for her being away, and she felt lonely. Whereas I was like, sweet, I can just do this, and that. But it's changed a bit now, even though she's still sad we're apart, and she is. And I was obviously somewhat sad at the start as well. Now I feel like I'm struggling with sort of like she sort of said she's got sort of used to it, and that's understandable as well. She got used to just life, and when we get to see each other again, that will be great. Whereas the loneliness has really crept in this last couple of months, and yeah, so I've been living with my mum. So I had my mum around every day, and my sister moved in a couple of a month ago. So I've had people around, and I've been seeing friends. But I mean, maybe it's like the work thing. Maybe I am realizing that I really place a lot of my well-being on my time with my partner more than I thought, and that's a very humbling thing. And I think that's a a beautiful thing. And maybe I mean I'm literally just figuring this out as I'm saying it. But yeah, maybe that's part of this sort of these thoughts coming up again about loneliness is like, well, should I just try and just be happy, with what I've got and where I am, and just not feel this loneliness, or should I sort of let this loneliness sort of be there, knowing that it's a signal that I want to, sort of be with Emma again. I guess maybe that's
But that makes it sound like you've got a choice in how you feel about it.
I I always feel that you have a choice in how you how you feel, and I do feel that, but I mean, maybe this is going a bit too philosophical on my own personal beliefs, but I feel like on a certain level, you do have a choice over how you think about things and how you view the world and
Mm,
how you react to things. And I feel like even though in the moment it's very difficult to catch that, over longer periods, I'm sure you can get to a place where you feel better about something through, just sort of self sort of development and things like that in a particular area of your life. So yeah, I think maybe if I wanted to, if I guess for example, if I knew I wasn't going to see Emma for 2 years, then I think it would be probably a foolish thing to accept that I'm just going to feel lonely for 2 years.
mm.
Whereas I can make that choice, like I'm going to feel lonely, but I can do certain things that are going to make me feel less lonely. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but yeah, I think it takes practice, or it takes a change of circumstance. I don't think you can sort of switch feelings on or off. And I don't think that's what you're saying either. It's about
no,
um, feel another sport analogy coming along somewhere.
us two very sporty people. But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess that would be my answer really. It's probably from that. It's probably realizing I've do you think that's maybe a sign of placing too much importance on a partner, or do you think it's healthy to feel lonely sometimes? It might not be a partner, you might be very, very close with a parent, or and spend a lot of time with them, and then if they go off somewhere or whatever, do you think it's healthy to have some loneliness?
Um, I think it's a sign of a healthy relationship. I think that was the first part of the question. Yes, because if you weren't getting certain things from the relationship that you're then missing when you're apart from that, um, then it's probably a sign that you're getting a lot of emotional gratification from that relationship.
Mm.
And then, did you say, do you think loneliness is a good thing?
Yeah, do you think it's good to feel lonely sometimes?
Yeah, I suppose it is. I suppose um in the way that feeling certain things can help you recognize um or make the positives more extreme. Um, you got to feel sadness to feel joy, I'm sure, is a lyric in many songs. But um yes, I think I'd need some more time with that one.
That's cool.
But it's a very interesting one. Yeah, I think it is, because I think in some regards it forces you to then reflect on what you need emotionally, um and then motivate you to go and get it.
Yeah. So I guess maybe if you use it in the right way, it can be beneficial. I guess like any negatively feeling emotion, if you wallow in it for too long, then it just becomes
Yeah.
consuming, and then it doesn't have any real benefit anymore. But
Yeah, but I think we're both coming at it from quite a logical perspective. I think when a lot of people are in that quite extreme loneliness,
yeah.
I don't by any means think it's an easy thing to reflect your way out out of. Um,
So that I guess this comes to a previous question. I think I maybe got lost with it. If you know someone who is struggling and you feel like their their loneliness is fueling some of their real struggles, like mental struggles, but they're sort of saying, I want to be happy alone. I want to be happy doing this by myself. I guess a sort of type um, uh, yeah, who is a more maybe Buddhist type, or someone who um, is just, I guess, going through a spiritual journey, which is always, very positive if they're just trying to help themselves. How do you sort of approach that? Maybe actually, do you know what I mean? Like if you
Mm.
feel, and it's a difficult thing of like imposing your own thoughts on what's good for someone on them, but if you feel that they're trying really hard to be happy by themselves, but actually they could just do with a bit of social interaction, do you know how to sort of, how you would approach that sort of thing? Or
Um, I think you're right. It's a really tricky one because are we just conditioned to think that a certain way of doing things is the right way of doing things? We're told we're social creatures, um, but I don't think any of us have studied humans enough to know if that's true or if that's a social construct. We're all in a matrix. um, um, so I think how I I think a lot of times people have relationships. I'm not talking about romantic relationships here. I'm talking about any kind of relationships. I think
yeah,
it's a very rare case where um, people have no one in their life that cares about them. Um, I think if it's coming from that motivation of caring about someone, if you know someone well enough, I think sometimes you know what maybe they do and can see through whether it's a sort of social construct or not, whether they are better off reflecting on this on their own and sort of leaving them to it, or trying to guide them towards a more social experience to help them get there. I feel like I'm waffling, but I'm sort of thinking through
no, it's fine.
my answer whilst I'm answering it. Um, so I think if you know a person well, you sometimes know what's better for them than if they're in a moment of loneliness or darkness, and sometimes they would necessarily know for themselves. I don't mean that in a way that we should all be making decisions for other people.
Yeah, but it can
And
be
we also have
helpful.
our own, yeah, exactly. It can be helpful, and we have our own experiences to draw on as well. Um, and if it's coming from a place where you care about that person, then that already in itself is is can be quite helpful to feel. So I think loneliness comes from feeling completely alone, and I guess that part of that is not feeling like you're cared for. um so if that's your motivation for trying to help them, even if it's not what they necessarily want, I think the effort of trying to help can already be a positive thing.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess doing it in a certain way that's not too imposing. It's just sort of like saying my own point of view on it and saying what I think without sort of, being like, this is what you should do type thing.
It is an interesting line though, where what's the line between sort of knowing what could help someone? So with, if someone's going through stuff and you know that, for example, therapy might be quite a positive
Hmm.
experience for them to get through it, where's the line between um kind of thinking that, and then if they're quite adamant they don't want to do it, do you know what I mean? Where's that line?
Yeah,
Using that as an example.
I think it's I think it is, yeah, just trying to walk the line, really walk on the tightrope, trying to push what you think is really important, but not not push them too hard. There's plenty of people who have made big life choices, and sometimes it's taken someone to say something to them quite bluntly, or maybe not even bluntly, but and that's completely turned their life around. um, and I think, yeah, I feel like if you've said it and you get quite a lot of resistance, then it's best not to say it for at least for a while, to just
Right.
leave it with them. I think it's also being very careful about how you approach them with it and being really, really, yeah, tactful. I think that's something that's one thing I've really learned from Emma actually is one of my main flaws is impatience. So I just want to do things right now, and if something's wrong, I want to say it right now. And like we worked we worked in a holiday park together in New Zealand a year or two ago, and it was great because we got to see each other's working style. And one of my main flaws is, well, the benefit of what I was doing is that I was really happy to talk to the bosses anytime, and I was always willing to challenge them about anything. But I would just want to talk to them right now, even if they're on the toilet, I'm talking to them, right now. They need to know what's wrong. They need to know what they're doing, and so I feel that for myself, I need to be really aware of being tactful when I'm talking to someone about something really sensitive or something, or I'm sort of saying my only point of view of what I think would help them type thing.
Mm,
Because I know that I'm susceptible to just barreling in there, being too much too soon, and then it just going all wrong type thing.
right. Yeah, because I suppose people have to as well, if they're going to get enough out of it, have to feel they if you're going into it already being resistant because somebody's bulldozed you into doing it, then you're going to get way less out of it than if you go into it from a place of acceptance.
Yeah, yeah. And people, if it's the sort of subjects we're talking about where people are already feeling sensitive anyway, it
Mm,
it can just it can just I think push people too far. Um,
yeah.
but it is a really difficult one. Um, yeah, but I guess that's sort of my understanding of um, people with it. But I'm very interested that I've got a theory, and it may be wrong, but I feel like social interactions are so much more heavily related to well-being than I think I generally hear and read about. Um, I think that I want to read more. I want to read a lot more about sort of loneliness and social interactions, but I feel there's a lot. Like I said, like there's you can do so much of writing or so much meditating or so much of going on a run, but sometimes having a good social interaction, I feel, can really boost someone and really give them a great, yeah, just a sense of well-being. Um, and that's my instinct anyway. But I don't know whether that's just because I love social interactions and I'm a more sociable person. Um,
Mm,
I don't know whether people are genuinely happy just not socializing at all, like, or very very little. I really don't know. I'm skeptical. I'm just, and this is the maybe more imposing side of me, but I'm skeptical that people are truly happy if they spend very little time with other people. It's just hard for me to imagine, I guess.
yeah, I agree. I think if I mean, even if you just strip it back to the physical basics, we get, hormones and things like that from laughter, which you can laugh on your own, but generally more social interactions um produce more opportunities to laugh outside of watching a brilliant film,
And
a
laughter's a
brilliantly
key
hilarious
one.
film.
Like they've done loads of tests on that. Like and from your own experience, if you like stand up is a perfect one. If you watch a stand up special by yourself on TV, you will nowhere near laugh as much as if you're in that actual like
Yeah,
stadium or wherever, or even a small crowd with all these other laugh like and people like there's I think there's things of like if you're in a crowd of people laughing at stand up, for example, just having this ripple wave effect of laughs, just you just send on it and then you don't,
yeah,
whereas you wouldn't have done necessarily by yourself.
yeah. Very,
Yeah.
very true.
Um,
And how much of that do you think is wrapped up in like physical contact? I always think it's interesting how when we're, sad, um how comforting a hug can be, and I've never really
mm,
got my head around what, because it's just someone else physically putting their arms around you, but it's such a comfort. And I
yeah.
wonder, it's an interesting one, physical contact, because obviously that's something that's massively reduced thanks to coronavirus.
Thanks,
And for
coronavirus.
thanks coronavirus, especially if you're living on your own. Like, we're
Yeah.
quite lucky that we have households of people that we can get that from, but if
Mm.
you're living on your own, that must be so massively reduced.
I think I really, again, it's back to, I really think it's so much more important than we realize. I think there's so much emphasis on nutrition and on, running and these sort of things, but I think two of the things that I think are really missing in well-being are sleep and social interactions. I feel like
Mm.
sleep is so much more important. It's not talked about enough. And I guess it's not as interesting because with nutrition you can go into so much more detail and there's so many more choices, and with exercise obviously you've got the same. Whereas sleep, you just, there's only so many ways to sleep. But yeah, and I feel like the social thing is a real, again, I haven't seen enough data, to actually offer some examples, but my instinct from stuff I've read from my own life experiences is yeah, that it's just, I think we are social animals. I don't think that's a social construct. I really do think, and like, a big part of us evolving was language. Like, language is cited as
Yeah.
pretty much one of the main things that has made us into who we are today in terms of a much more intelligent, a much more dominant species. It's because we can, this complex language, and language, you can't do by yourself. And
Yeah.
I just feel like it for me, it seems to be pointing in that direction, as that, we are wired to have that, like you say, that physical interaction. And it is so important. I mean, I've like you're saying, the long distance. There's only so many times you can say on someone on, FaceTime or whatever, "Oh, I want to give you a hug," or "Wish I could hug you right now," and it's just
Mm.
be like, "Oh yeah, but you can't." And I think it's I felt that over time, is that, um, actually having that physical, yeah, like a hug or something like that, it makes a world of difference, really.
But why do you think that is? If you're getting, if you're getting emotional support from someone over the phone or over FaceTime or whatever it is, where do you think that need for the physical contact comes from?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess my example I would give this time, which is probably a bit more, probably a bit more accurate than the football example, but we've all got used to Zoom now. Well, I say got used to. We all know what Zoom is now. Most people have done it, either whether it's a family quiz or, for work or whatever. And with Zoom, even if your internet, everyone's internet is perfect and it's to time and everything like that, you that natural instinct of what we feel we're missing so much, not even touching the other people, but just being in the same room. Like, so we're cousins, and we have, when we're together, all us cousins, we have this dynamic that is just, it is magical in a way. It's sort of like, when people have those sort of dynamics, whether it's best friends or partners or cousins, you almost, it's, you can't put your finger on it. It's just this sort of
Yeah.
ping, 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 ping. But when we go on Zoom again, we had a bit of lag or whatever, but it was, it's a pretty good connection. It's not the same, you
No,
know.
it's proper awkward, those Zoom calls.
Yeah, you just don't have that same. It's and yeah, okay. There's a problem with technology, and maybe if technology was super duper, but I just feel that just being in the same room, there's so much of social interactions that we don't even realize. It's like this thing of like, um, most communication isn't via words, which I
Yeah,
shouldn't
it's
say on a
only meant to be.
podcast, but
I think it's something like 20%.
yeah,
20% is the words, like 60% is the body language, and then the rest is like the tone at which you deliver the words. I think that's
exactly.
right.
Well, exactly, and there'll just be so many things that we don't realize. Like science will go along and we'll start to actually pinpoint that 60% and like break it down even more. It might be the smell of
Mm,
people. It might be the body
mm,
heat. You might there's just it's a very spiritual term, but I feel that there is an aura with people, and the reason I'm happy to use that spiritual word is because I don't know, and I don't think most people know what the science is of when you're actually
mm.
there, the energy or whatever you want to call it. There is that people walk into a room and there is a feeling with it. It doesn't matter what they say, or even if they look the same. That there is an energy there. So I don't know exactly, but I feel that we bring so much that we don't know yet. To whenever we walk into a room, we see another person, we're close to that person. There is really something there, and I think the further you get away from that, it's you start to realize more and more. If you take like the extreme end of the spectrum, so if you have like, you're texting your mum from a really far away. No, we don't have to be a far away place, but you're texting your mum and you haven't seen her for a long time, and then the difference between that and you're saying the same things but while giving her a hug, like
Yeah.
everyone who hears that example will just know. It doesn't have to be your mum, but anyone they feel close with, they know that is such a different thing, and I'm not sure exactly what that is, but yeah,
Yeah, I know the logical scientist in me really wants to have a explanation for it. But
yeah,
you're right, I don't know if there is one. There's certainly not one that I've come to, a conclusion that I've come to. I've come to the same conclusion as you, that it's necessary. And I think the charity Mind says that they've got like 5 pillars of well-being. I think it's nutrition, exercise, and social is one of them. I can't remember what the other two are. Social is one of them, but it
oh,
is
okay.
interesting how little kind of coverage it gets compared to some of the other pillars for well-being, given how like you say, fundamental it is.
Do you feel that? Do you feel that it's not talked about enough, or when we're talking about well-being, that other things take a lot more precedence? Or
Uh, I guess I think because it's so ancient is maybe why it's acknowledged less. And because it's in so many aspects of, so I think, the idea of well-being, although it's always been there, it feels relatively modern, um, as in the sort of attention we're giving to it. And that might just be because I'm of an age now where well-being's really important, because I'm more tired than I've ever been in my life. So I've certainly noticed it more as an important concept over the last, I'd say, maybe like 5 or 6 years, and growing more and more every year. Um, and living in a city, I think, is amplified, because there's quite a lot. Sometimes when you live in a city, that conflicts with your well-being needs. Your space is less.
mm,
Um, there's You can have quite unhealthy lifestyles unless you consciously make an effort to address what your um what your mental health needs are.
mm.
Um, so I can't remember what the question was.
um, I can't even remember what the question was. Put me on the spot now.
Oh, whether social
Yeah, whether it's
is a
talked about enough, and
yeah. So I think because it's such an ancient one, whereas some of the other ones like exercise and nutrition, they feel a lot more modern. And by modern, I don't mean in the last 5 or 6 years. I mean like more in the last kind of few decades. Whereas the social aspect, it goes back. Our awareness of it, I feel, is probably a lot more historical. It's just in terms of, studies that I read when I was studying, there is a lot around social that goes way, way back, whereas more of the kind of nutrition exercise side of things feels a bit more modern.
Right. So,
Um,
because you studied psychology,
mm,
and there was quite a lot of like social stuff in there. Then was there like, but older sort of science, was it?
yeah, definitely. I would say so. It's definitely not a new concept for people to be researching and testing. Um, but because it is so complex, it's that I don't think you can ever end studying it because it's
No.
so, yeah, it's such an interesting one.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I've got one fun question to wrap it up on.
Okay.
Um. So, would you rather a year, so a full year, right, of
Yeah.
being alone, right? So you're just alone for the whole year. You're gonna have all your needs taken care of. Maybe you're in a hut in the Himalayas. Um,
Lovely.
yeah. So a whole year alone, or would you rather have company absolutely everywhere? So when you're on the toilet, when you're in the shower. I mean, you get to obviously choose the company.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. Definitely 100% the first one.
Really?
Yeah, being alone for a whole year. To be honest, that sounds quite idyllic for me.
I guess you're so busy that actually sounds like the perfect thing right now.
I wouldn't want it for any more than that. But the idea of company everywhere I go is no. As a self-confessed introvert, that would be horrendous. I try and avoid company most of the week.
Cool. Well then, yeah.
Which would you pick?
um, I mean, going to the toilet would be the hard one, I think. Um,
You don't strike me as someone that's shy about going to the toilet in front of people.
that's true. I feel like I would enjoy the company one more. I think I would enjoy that year more. But I feel like the alone one, I'd probably come out of it a better person. You know, like people go on these like I'd really love to go on like a silent retreat for like 10 days or whatever. So I feel like being alone for a year, I think I would come out and I'd learn a lot about myself and then can move forward.
Do
Um,
you think though? Doesn't that conflict with everything you were just saying?
and we'll end there. Dan hasn't got a clue what he's talking about.
Is that what
Yeah.
you're going to name the podcast episode?
Yeah, maybe I should rename the whole podcast as Dan doesn't have a clue. I'll just be a picture of me with like shrugging my shoulders, like looking
With a
confused.
question mark over your head.
Oh, that's a much better podcast idea. Right, that'll be next. I'll do two podcasts. One where in this one I'll try and act like I know what I'm talking about, and then the other one I'll be myself and just gargle.
Just your guest at the end being like, what was that?
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I'll listen to it.
we've both learned something about ourselves. You've learned that you want to get away for a year and just be by yourself. And I've learned I don't have a clue what I'm talking about. So,
Yeah, I think we came out of this with completely different ideas about loneliness than we went into it. I'm like, oh, loneliness, that sounds lovely.
But no, to anyone listening, I would like to say, especially, I might contact a couple of people I've done a podcast with before. One of them who's actually been on a silent retreat. I'd be quite interested to see what he thinks about sort of the stuff we've been talking about. But yeah, anyone who's interested in this subject and has their own points of view, and also anyone who really feels comfortable alone for a long time and can explain that from their point of view, you know, without any sort of friends and family, like if they genuinely feel a lot happier, I'd be really interested to talk to you, and if you feel alone or that sort of stuff, I think this is a very wide ranging subject. So yeah, to anyone listening,
Mm.
yeah, I'd love to get you on. But yeah, finally, thank you very much, Hannah.
Thank you, Dan. That was really interesting.